You are now listening to the Big Data Beard. Well, hey everybody, I'm Cory Minton with the Big Data Beard podcast, and we are at Data Science Salon in Austin, Texas today. And we're excited to have Andy join us from NumFOCUS. Andy, welcome to the Big Data Beard podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you do us a favor and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at NumFOCUS?
Yeah, so I'm the president of NumFOCUS. I came here from a background of data science, kind of started in academia, got a PhD in computer science, and went off and did things like study oceans and molecular biodynamics and whatnot. And the code was more interesting than maybe the science to me. Okay. And so that wasn't boding well for an academic career where the science is really where it's at. So a bunch of us got together, the scientific Python community, and we was like, we need a way to accept money to write code for science. So we founded NumFOCUS. And so NumFOCUS is a nonprofit that represents about, we have different levels of projects. So we have about 25 that are, fully sponsored. We take money and help them manage money, give them physical entity, and help them with all legal issues. And then we have like another 25 that are kind of in the club. They can apply for grants that we give, and they can also be part of our events and things like that, encourage all basically coding for science, open data science code. I think we kind of started before data science was like the big buzzword. So it was all right. Scientific computing, and now it's kind of scientific and data research software is what the words have kind of changed a bit. But as president, my kind of role is to kind of go and make sure everything keeps working and encourage everybody and high five people and bring more and awesome open tools to the ecosystem. I spend a lot of time talking to companies that use our tools and how they can give back to the community, how community members can even engage with the rest of the corporate world and bring academia together to address some of the world's problems in a kind of around the open code that exists.
Yeah. So in this world of data science, why is open source such an important concept?
Yeah, I think that, open source has kind of gone through a whole range of things. Mm-hmm. And, from very early on, a weaponization of of your ideas to bring standards to big tech companies. And science, it was, more of an easier way to share ideas. And so the open side of it was, all right, I, need to share what I did to do any sort of analysis or any sort of proof that my science works. I mean, it's like, what the Excel bug, right? It was hidden for so long and maybe even caused depressions, right? The Excel depression. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it all came.
Hang on. We're going to get into that.
So, yeah. So a software bug that was published by science and then, led to policy and because it wasn't as open and it wasn't shared, wasn't caught for years later and probably even changed, economies because of it. And so our viewpoint, it was coming from the open world. It was the only way to really do scholarship, really show all the aspects of science is to make it open. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's somewhat controversial. I don't think it's as controversial today as it was 10 years ago. But science is very complex. If you want to predict how much the oceans are going to warm, mm-hmm. It's not a matter of take a few measurements and show on an Excel spreadsheet. It's a very set of complicated codes that are spread throughout the world and lots of PhD level scientists working on it. And so to not have that open, it just makes it a lot harder to accept those answers and to even capture the bugs and things like that. And the other side of it is that, coming from now in a corporate world, I think making a platform open actually makes it so other people can share. So, we've had data science for a long time. I mean, but now that we have tools that are very open that anybody can get into it, I mean, in 10 weeks, you can become a data scientist at numerous boot camps, which are all teaching open tools. And that, if the tools weren't open and accessible, that couldn't happen. So the whole kind of acceleration of data science in our culture really depends on that openness, because closed tools often integrate better. They often maybe more accurate out of the box and things like that. And there's a lot of really great properties. But if you want to give access to maybe an underserved minority population, open is a much faster, easier way to do that.
Interesting. So help me understand like the differences or maybe the similarities between you refer to scientific computing versus what we oftentimes talk about like is big data more in the enterprise. Tell me the difference that you, as you see it in terms of scientific computing versus big data.
Yeah, I mean, so scientific computing, I think, is more like the mathematical process of putting scientific like processes on computers, right? So there's a lot of folks who were doing scientific computing with very little data. Like you have a model, you can do linear algebra, you can discretize a geophysical space on a computer, and there's been a long tradition of that. Like, I mean, you could say there's hundreds of years of doing scientific computing. Right. Then there's like coming to data science, which is all the bringing statistics to that rigorous computer modeling side of things. Okay. And you don't have to be big data to do data science. I mean, there's a lot of really good small data problems. In fact, I would argue that medium data is maybe a better marker for like what most companies and most people are going to be doing, because like the big data problems these days tend to be the ones that go at scale, and most companies don't operate at the scale of like a Google or a Facebook, right? And so that big data challenge is really not in everyone's purview, but everybody has medium data. Everyone has some data, like whether it's their customer accounts, whether it's just like weather throughout the country that's going to fit just outside of Excel spreadsheet or outside the memory of your computer, but it's not like I need a cluster.
Yeah,
right?
Slightly challenging to traditional methods, but not quite at the scale of the Web 2.0 companies that are dealing with those massive scale problems.
Yeah, and so then you have big data come in, and big data tends to use a lot of scientific computing principles, but how do you do that at like you said, the scale, the billions and trillions of data elements a minute sort of thing?
Yeah.
And to be honest, like most really good big data strategies is to figure out how to get a small data problem out of that big data and then solve that one, right?
That's so totally true.
This is like, all right, so we have a Hadoop and a Spark cluster. How do we get that down to a small data set that we can do evaluation and then stream it off and do a lot of small data problems versus one big data problem?
Remind me, we got to get mediumdatabeard.com. That's got to be the next thing.
So you mentioned Hadoop, Apache Foundation. So do you work with them at all? Any collaboration with them?
Yeah, I mean, we're not like officially collaborating in a lot of ways. I think that we know a lot of people in the Apache Foundation. Apache Foundation has like, they have the Apache way, which is, really around, I guess in some ways it got started as a community, but it was in a corporate world, right? And so a lot of their policies, like that, for example, they have CLAs, they have the Apache license, they have many like kind of policies to protect corporations. And scientists they're just like, I don't really care about like getting everybody to read a legal agreement just to accept a line of code, right? Yeah. I don't really want to have to force this one particular license, which may be the best license in the world, but hey, there's a lot of these hundreds of licenses. Why should I pick one? Scientists are kind of, like a burly, they don't want to spread everybody.
Look like us. Yeah, I got that.
Right. And so
I've never been called a scientist before, but thank you.
Yeah, there you go. So I think Apache Foundation is a great community. I think that, we look to them for a lot of the way they organize themselves, a lot of the way they build community, but we try to do it in a way that's a little bit closer to like the way scientists work, and maybe not as, stringent on, the patch structure, or maybe not. So you get to pick your own technical path. You get to pick your own licenses and things like that. We have 3 basic rules for our projects. The first is scientifically oriented. Excel is used by tons of people, and there's open source types of open source Excel programs out there, but we wouldn't represent those because Excel fundamentally isn't a science program, right? Whereas like SciPy, the scientific Python package, is very much targeted at scientists. So that's like, are you in the kind of the club, the mission, if you will? Second is, do you kindness community? Do you have a kind of code of conduct? Do you have a way of working with a community? Are you open to that community? Can you take feedback? That sort of thing. And then finally, one that's becoming increasingly more important, or and maybe differentiating the open source community more, is lead open. So if you think of a lot of corporate open source, there's there's the old the bazaar versus the cathedral, and a lot of times people are doing what a friend of mine James Harrison calls cathedral before the bazaar. So they'll go build something like TensorFlow is a good example. They built TensorFlow, they released it to the public, so it's under the cathedral, and then it goes out to the bazaar, and it's done wonderful things as an open source mechanism, but largely it's led by one company.
Right.
And so that, since we're at 501c3 and we believe in public kind of access, that wouldn't fall into our purview because it's one company that is privately owned and the biases are not in the public interest of that. And so that kind of changes kind of the nature of the projects we work with.
For sure. So you mentioned SciPy as one of the projects, but give us an idea of some of the other projects that maybe the bigger ones or the ones that you're spending a lot of time on that you think are interesting.
Yeah, I think the ones most people really know about are SciPy, NumPy, Pandas, in what we call the PyData stack.
Okay.
From that, you'll get scikit-image and a whole range of Python packages.
Mm-hmm.
We work with scikit-learn, which is a very popular tool. They fall not in our fully sponsored projects, so they have their own foundation that we work with, but they're kind of inside the affiliated projects and whatnot. Then there's the Julia world. So Julia programming language, which is relatively newcomer, I guess, as far as languages go, but has made a lot of impact. And we've got several projects, including just the Julia core language, which includes a lot of things that are broken off into different open source packages in the Python world. So like Julia comes with its own SciPy and its own pandas type things, right? And so, but we do have Jump, which is a optimization, like a package. So it does linear programming, I believe, and those sorts of things. And we also work with some codes like Stan, which is it's a C++ modeling library that then has different implementations in different languages, and it's used by for example Facebook. It's the underlying predictor of their profit system, which does all the predictions of their company metrics and whatnot. And it's a big open source platform, which is great. And we have several other probabilistic programming kind of paradigms. We have PyMC and Pomegranate and so on. And then we have things that are very niche for a scientific domain, such as the AstroPy and MD analysis, which is molecular dynamics, and things like that, and SunPy, which is a solar study. Then we have tools that are lower level, a package manager called Conda, which is kind of data scientists are really gravitated to because it installs not only just Python, but it can install R and lots of different binary packages. And then there's a whole community around managing the packages. So data scientists tend not to like to use things like Debian, Yum, and things like that are distribution heavy. We love to play around because that really just pull all the different tools together and keep them up to date. So Conda helps with that. And then we have I think the biggest kind of visualization and tell a story, as I like to call it, is the Jupyter project. Mm-hmm. And so Jupyter has kind of come off as probably one of the bigger success stories since we started. They've gone from, a small team to a very large team on many continents and many countries. And even have their own big conference, JuliaCon or JupyterCon. JuliaCon exists too, and it's also multi-continent, but so JupyterCon exists too.
So Jupyter is one of the projects. Wow,
they were one of our big first ones we started.
Yeah, no, it's all the rage today in data science.
That's all we hear about.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
we're doing our job.
There you
absolutely.
Go. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, and I'm sure all the projects are your babies in some sort of sense. What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I don't really have a favorite.
I'll give you an out. You can say you love them all equally.
Well, I can tell you what I curse the most.
Oh,
let's go.
That's definitely the Pandas API, but they're working on it. The good guys, they do it. But it's just is it IX or AX or iLoc or Loc or just the API there. I was well, it's the best thing I know of, but at the same time, it's hard to remember.
Yeah.
All right.
So beyond helping to develop and support these open source projects, what other kinds of, offerings does NumFOCUS bring to the market? I mean, are you guys doing, I think typically a lot of these software companies or at least organizations supporting software do things like training and enablement, that kind of thing. What sort of offerings does NumFOCUS provide?
Yeah, good question. We're always trying to figure out like the best way to generate that revenue model. Right now, we're public nonprofit, and most of our money comes through grants for these projects. And but at the same time, we try to make it so that those grants go as much as possible to the projects and help those project teams. So we do a few other activities which are more educational in nature. We hold the PyData event series. Okay. We have other events that are on our projects like JupyterCon and JuliaCon and PhoenixCon and like a whole bunch of user project cons. But PyData is the one that is kind of our big branded project that we go out and I think we're running around 30, almost 30 this year. You know, we have like 100,000 members in meetups. So just organizing the user community around the PyData ecosystem. We're also end up playing a large role in advocacy for research software and the communities. And so I just was in Washington last week talking to an NSF panel on like how research software is evolving and how we can sustain it for scientists and things like that. And we are always looking for ways to figure out new ways to make money. But we've talked about launching educational trainings and things like that. But for the most part, we haven't kind of gotten there. We're such a small team. There's 7 of us who actually work on the project, on the NumFOCUS business every day to help like the 300 or so core contributors around our projects. So we keep pretty busy with that. Yeah. So most of our like PyData brings in a lot of money to run the actual organization, and the grants kind of run to fund the projects, but only a little bit goes to actually fund some financial coordination and things like that.
Gotcha. So a lot of what, there's this marriage of scientific computing, big data, AI world happening. And a lot of the projects that you support have a variety of kind of use cases, some in very kind of specific ways. But I'm curious at a more macro level, like go up a level, what are some of the next big innovations that have to happen in order for us to really see scientific computing and AI take the next big jump forward?
Oh, wow. Oh, man. Like, when does it gain consciousness?
Oh, yeah. Like, do you think the singularity's coming? Or how far off is that?
When it wakes up.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of bigger problems. Like, there's a lot of big steps to get to before, like, AI becomes, like, the big dominant force in like everybody's life. I mean, it's already changing every person's life. Everybody, wakes up and does their Google search, and that has a lot of AI technologies on it. But the, vast majority of people aren't, being driven by kind of an AI mission, if you will. And a lot of businesses don't know how to use AI very well. And so I think that the next kind of big challenge for the AI community and the data community is making it accessible to a wider variety of people. Like scientists, today do a lot of work on trying to find cures for cancer and maybe patterns in weather to like predict disasters and things like that. And AI could help there, but it's not as clear, right? So the tools of AI they're hard to use. There's, no one tells you, oh yeah, you have to have millions of labeling points and things like that to make it work well. And so like,
you do.
And hurricanes, they happen when they happen, and you can't really just repeat that a million times. So maybe deep learning's out of the picture for that, right? So making the tools easier to use and bringing the literacy level up of like the corporate America and the science, the scientific elites and so on to take this technology and use it for good. I think we're also wrestling with the ethics, right? I think you talk about this at the conference a little bit. There are a lot of ethical questions that come up when you collect data. There's a lot of responsibility there. And I think that most organizations are unprepared to deal with that. There's a few compliance things, but they're either scared away by the compliance. So then it only leads to like the elites actually being able to afford to do really cool things with big data. And so I think that's a shame. And that's something our community should help the rest of the world kind of understand and use data to their, to the good of their enterprises.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned there too that, it's about making it more accessible, but bringing it to a broader audience. And I noticed one of the things that NumFOCUS is really focused on is that diversity and inclusion. So tell me about the programs that NumFOCUS has to support, making this technology more accessible and frankly more diverse in terms of the people that interact with it.
And thank you for embarrassing me because I totally forgot about all our inclusion programs. Thankfully, I have a wonderful communications director who manages a lot of those things.
Okay.
But when we started out, we made like a bold statement that if you're going to join NumFOCUS, you have to have a code of conduct. Yeah. And the code of conduct kind of evolved out of an understanding that, the open source world was only serving a minority of the population and generally are white males who were participating. And if you sat down and you started asking questions, as we kind of did, you found that most underrepresented minorities did not feel welcome to that community. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it had to do with our, the way we acted online. I mean, when you grow up playing Halo and kill them all, kind of that's what you do on the internet, right? And that translates over to a lot of our online presence in open source, which has become a professional activity. Mm-hmm. So just from the very get-go, normalizing that it's a safe place for everybody to contribute was a very big initiative for us. And, we got a lot of flack from it. I mean, we got hate mail and all that sort of thing, and that's fine.
That's the people that you didn't want involved in the thing anyway.
Yeah,
so we're not inclusive to those people.
Yeah.
But then from there, so that's kind of like a policy kind of idea. But then moving on to, hey, our events need to be inclusive. And this is a great event where half the speakers are female. And, that's something you don't see at most data conferences. And I think it's something that's hard. When Anna kind of takes that on, it wasn't like I know all the women who can come.
Yeah.
It's really I have to spend a lot more time cultivating that pipeline and bringing women to the leadership positions. And for our side of that, we've actually tried to push in all of our PyData events and all of our meetups to encourage women and minorities to come up. We have a Discover Cookbook, which is just a way to maybe nudge units, if you will, to show that you are inclusive in an event. Things like labeling food that one of our previous project directors kind of came up with. Look, most people who have eating kind of differences in how they eat, they feel, they go to a conference and they just can't eat, or they bring their own food. Why don't you just label what's in the food, right? And so there's a very simple nudge thing. Is all right, we'll put that this is a vegan friendly and this one's a vegetarian friendly, and it's the sort of thing that when you're scrambling to get a conference together, you don't want to think about all the time, but having some validation that actually helps bring more people to your conference has been the sort of thing we're trying to promote. We have a diversity, inclusion, and scientific computing committee that is kind of funny. It was a mailing list a long time ago. I just kind of started and encouraged a lot of people to come, and then Gina, our wonderful communications director, started picking up and made a real kind of committee out of, and she's done all the good work. So I created the mailing list, and then we actually have a real program out of it. So
that's awesome.
That's the beauty of being the president. You can just say, oh, this is interesting, and then hopefully someone will pick it up, right?
That's awesome. But why do you one of the things we saw today was, as you said, there's a lot of women and diversity in the sessions here, but why is it that we should care about diversity? Because I know it's a hot topic, but in your mind, in scientific computing, in this big data space, why is diversity so important?
Well, I think that you kind of have two choices, right? You can focus on diversity, or you can ignore it. Mm-hmm. And if you ignore it, it won't happen, right? And so then you ask, well, if I ignore it, I'm going to still get bright people, right? Yeah. But you're going to get bright people of a specific bias, right? It's like a few years ago when it came out that none of the facial recognition software worked on black people. Mm-hmm. I mean, how crazy is that to think that, it should only work on white people? Yeah. Well, that comes from a singular thinking mind. Mm-hmm. And so you had bright people who were all white who, thought of everything they could have around this, but they forgot to mention oh yeah, there's this whole other population that we work with every day, right? So that you're not going to percolate all the ideas by one group. Yeah. And so if you can work a little harder to get that inclusivity, your products are going to be better. They're going to think about all the edge cases more. You're going to present people who are, less able to represent themselves in the business environment sometimes. That'll give them a leg up. And so it reduces the structural violence is, I guess, it's a harsh term, but structural violence towards people who have a hard time coming up in society. And those injustices exist everywhere. And so we, very strongly believe that you're not going to weed those out unless you actually include the people that are experiencing them every day. I mean, I don't have the experience of a poor black boy in urban America. So I have to go find someone and ask them, bring them to my space and try to help them come because they can't come on their own. So provide them money, provide them an invitation to say that they're welcome. Yeah. And then I get to experience a tiny bit of what they actually do and what they feel. And so, but I wouldn't know how to I wouldn't know how to even acknowledge them if I didn't include them in that group.
It's hard to have even empathy for folks if you don't actually experience it with them. And their experiences are valuable. That's very cool. So
and also to that point though, I think all the different lenses creates a more well-rounded picture, which is really what we're looking for. So developers, how do developers get started? Or who get to work with you? Like, how do they get onboarded?
Yeah, so for the most part, I mean, this is maybe something that I look at the Apache Foundation in jealousy a bit, because for us, a lot of what we do is such a small organization. The answer is you build a nice project and then you talk to us.
Nice.
So for we don't have a good incubator product. We'd love to start building something that incubates developers who have an idea that kind of throw code over the wall and try to get things together to build a community. But for the most part, we're working with communities that have built up a little bit and then need a home that can handle their fiscal resources and things like that. For anybody who's just a new developer, it's hey, I have time, I have know-how, I can code in React. It's all right, here's Interact, which is trying to lower the barrier of entry to a Jupyter notebook. I mean, I love Jupyter a lot, but it's kind of crazy. In order to use it, you have to know how to start a web server and know what a terminal is. I mean, it's very easy to learn Python, but why is it so hard to start the Jupyter notebook and do its thing?
Yeah.
Interact is a response to that, and they use React and a lot of really great design. If you want to be more on the hardcore data side, right? NumPy and Pandas are always looking for people to help, and they actually have a really good pipeline of how you can come in, what issues you can solve, easy problems, harder problems, and kind of start contributing right away. And so we have tons of projects with easy lists. If you're a younger person, maybe in college, you can do the Google Summer of Code, which we're a big part of, and that's actually how a lot of developers kind of come in. I mean, Google's program, it's not perfect. There's always a large fraction of students that fall away, but then there's a lot who come on and become maintainers even. And so that's been a really great pipeline for young developers to get a mentor and learn how to come into the system. So it's more find a project you like, check out their bug list and start talking to them.
There you go. So on the other side of it though, you've also got, so you have the committers and the developers that are working towards the projects, but you also have sponsoring organizations. So what does it mean for an organization to sponsor or to partner with NumFOCUS, and what do they get for? What's in it for the companies that are partnering with you?
Yeah, so now my executive director is going to be mad at me because I don't have my sponsorship right in front of me. Thanks. All right.
We'll list them on the show notes. It'll be good. Don't worry about it.
So if you asked Leah, she would point out that there's a sponsorship prospectus on our website that has a lot of details. I think the first and foremost kind of action you have as a corporate sponsor is that you're giving back to the community that is producing code that your team depends upon, because every company in the Fortune 500 depends on our code. Governments dependent upon our code. It's not like there's any business that can't say that there's some way they don't depend on our code. So just by joining, you're giving back and you're part of that community, which matters to developers when they choose where to work, right? So it's not these days you have a lot of options when you're developing where to work. It looks a lot better, or you feel a lot better if you're working at a place that supports the education of open data science and diversity and things like this. As you move up the levels, like there's, you can come to our conferences, you can sponsor the pieces on the website. We have a summit where the folks who are at a certain level can come and interact with the core maintainers for a weekend or a couple of days. And then we have, like, at our top level, we have a board of advisors who kind of get the inside loop and maybe even help us, like, identify vectors of money to, like, put into the projects. Since we are public, there isn't a fee, like a bounty kind of side. You can't come and say, I want pandas to work on Israeli data types. And you're like, okay, I don't know what that means, but, you
But that's not allowed.
you can't just say, now, if you convince them, like, oh, that's a good idea, and they say, yes, please pay us to do that, that's different. But if you come in and say your results are dependent, your money is dependent upon those results, right? That doesn't work very well.
Gotcha.
So for a good example is NVIDIA's working with us because the Conda teams want their packages to work on GPUs. And NVIDIA's really making a large push to get our tools working on GPUs better internally. And so externally, they've kicked in some money to help the Conda team and Conda Forge team to help them get the average user on a GPU and utilizing it for the whole data science pipeline. So
very cool. Well, it's been great to talk with you, Andy. What I took away from it is that NumFOCUS is a nonprofit organization driving open and inclusive standards in scientific computing and those projects that are scientific oriented. And you got a bunch of projects, some like Jupyter I didn't even know were part of your team, which is incredible. And we thank you for your contributions to the scientific and big data community.
Thank you.
I want to shift gears, and we're going to have a little chat we call rapid fire.
We've learned a lot from our guests about big data, but now it's time to get a bit personal in a segment we like to call Rapid Fire. Pew pew.
All right, Brett, take it away, buddy.
All right. So what's the latest book you've read that you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, I just finished up the Phoenix Project, but I'll recommend The Goal, because I think The Goal by Layu Goldratt. Then the Phoenix Project is kind of a rewrite for the DevOps community, and it's a great book. But then I thought, I like going back to the roots of, like, the real old school business problem and seeing how it's affect the world. So The Goal by Layu Goldratt. I think it's funny because I have a lot of people telling me, like, you're a coder, Andy, you should learn some business. And, like, then I get this book and it's like, oh yeah, every business person reads that book. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So it's
because every business person wants to be a coder.
Yeah, maybe. So if you're a developer, especially, go read The Goal, because that'll, I think, give you an insight of, like, what business people think about sometimes.
Okay. So when you walk on stage for conferences like this one and you have a presentation, what would your walk-on music be?
Oh man, Back in Black, AC/DC.
All right,
that's strong.
That's a strong
I
one.
like that.
That's a good one. All right, so what piece of technology is making your life worse?
Worse? Oh man, that's a tough question for me. I love all my technical tools; they're fun.
You're a tinkerer, aren't you?
Yeah, totally. Man, can I pass? Because I have no idea.
Pass.
Everything's working. That's a good place to be in.
Guy.
What's your biggest personal money pit right now?
Oh, well, woodworking.
Okay.
Just have a garage, and I started watching YouTube on woodworkers, and there's a lot of really great crafters on YouTube. And it actually, I like it because it's what I found in the open source world early on in my life is, like, I liked going for the crafters who were building and cared about their craft a lot, and they were sharing it. And now YouTube, and I found that in woodworking. But unlike open source, it's not as, like, I can't just learn it on the internet and download some free tools. So Hazard Fraught Tools has got a lot of my money now.
There you go.
That's cool. That's cool. What show are you binging on right now?
Actually, that's podcast. Freakonomics is the Freakonomics podcast,
and then soon to be Big Data Beard as well, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Stephen Dubner's awesome. He's a crazy smart guy.
All right, and lastly, where's the next interesting place that you're going?
You mean like a destination, like Hawaii or something?
Where are you traveling?
Business trip or anything cool?
Well, no.
Good for you. Home?
Yeah.
Jealous.
I guess I'm going to I'm going to go to the beach, I guess. And we haven't decided which beach, either Outer Banks in North Carolina with my sister or just stick to Galveston. We're good Galveston fans.
Are you?
We're pretty simple folks. We stick around mostly. I'd like to get back to Europe, go to Italy or something, but I've got too much work to do.
Well, we appreciate you taking time from all that busy work to hang out with us on the Big Data Beard podcast, Andy.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening to the Big Data Beard podcast.
The music from this episode is by Andrew Bell. Check him out on iTunes or Spotify.
It would also be pretty cool if you reviewed us in your favorite podcast app. It really does help. Thanks for listening.